The format for the debate is as follows. One 7-minute speech from each side, followed by a 7-minute speech from each side. During the speeches, debaters will be allowed to interrupt one another for points of information. Opening speeches will be followed by a 10-minute session for audience questions. Following the audience question period, each side will offer a 5-minute closing speech. After the closing speech, the audience may stand to vote for the winning side. Debaters, I will keep the time to ring the bell each time when you have 1 minute left.
Before I start, it's a lot louder than I thought it was going to be. Before I start, I'd like to say an enormous thank you to everybody here at Chesapeake Community College for the very warm welcome that Matt and I have received. This is the 93rd year that a team from the United Kingdom have come and toured the United States. We've been here just over 6 weeks now, and we've got 2 weeks left to go. We've been to 19 states, and everywhere we've had excellent discussions, met some really wonderful people, and last night we had some really great crab. In Oregon, Ohio, and Oklahoma, in Alabama, Alaska, and Arkansas, in Massachusetts, Minnesota, and right here in Maryland, the people of America, men, women, and children, people just like me, just like you, and just like your families, are in danger because societies without gun regulation are dangerous. And I will not stand in good conscience and watch while honest Americans are shot and killed while they pray in church, or are shot and killed as they learn in their elementary schools, or are shot and killed in their small-town community colleges, just like this one, like happened in Oregon just a few weeks ago when we landed in that state. Because I don't want church communities to mourn their pastors, and I do not want college students to mourn their colleagues, and I do not want parents to bury their children when they're still 7 or 8 years old. So what is the solution that I propose to this terrible set of tragedies today? It is a model of gun control that looks largely like that we have in the United Kingdom. That means that there will be absolutely no private ownership of handguns, automatic or semi-automatic weapons. We will limit private gun ownership to single-shot rifles and 2-shot shotguns, and no ability to have pump action on those. In order to get a license for those guns, you will need, firstly, extensive background checks, but also a legitimate reason for the use of that gun, which we will limit to hunting and farming. That license will be contingent on you having access to land on which you will be doing the hunting or the farming, and permission from the landowner. We will require that ammunition is stored entirely separately from the gun, and it can only be used in that incredibly specific context. Basically, we think that we will allow you to keep hunting, but we don't think there is any other reason that you should be allowed to have guns. We will phase this in with a buyback mechanism so that people who currently own all of the guns that we're about to make illegal will have an opportunity to exchange them for the purchase value of that weapon. Hopefully that's reasonably clear. Matt can tell me if it's not. Why do we think that we should do this? I mean, quite simply, because guns kill people. Unfortunately, it's not just the headline cases that I point to when I open this speech. 250 people die in America every day because of gun violence. Standing here on this stage, as opposed to back home in the UK, I am 40 times more likely to die as a result of a gun than I would be on the other side of the Atlantic. That is obviously linked to the fact that we have gun control and the United States doesn't have that much. Importantly, lots of these deaths are incredibly preventable and are often accidents because one toddler every week shoots themselves, a parent, a sibling, or a friend, and that results in a death. This is obviously something that we can't conscience. But why is it that guns kill people rather than this people kill people thing? Largely because people who own those guns are often incredibly fallible. Notice that having an increase in mental health checks alone will not prevent this. Why is that? Well, firstly, because a mental health check is only good on the day that you get it and not subsequently, because people's mental health is incredibly fragile and it's very subject to change, right? 1 in 4 people in the United Kingdom will suffer from some kind of mental health problem at some point in their lives. You could buy a gun at 25 and be absolutely fine, but you could go through a loss of your job, you could go through a breakdown of your marriage, you could go through the death of a loved one, and all of those things would alter your mental state. Yeah, go on, Matt.
What difference is there between the British approach to firearms and the American approach to firearms?
Well, yeah, the constitutional one, I guess. I'm going to come on to that later. Okay, go on, I'll do that now. Right? Yeah, so the big difference, right, is that we don't have a sort of founding document that points to the idea that there is a right to bear arms. We don't have a Second Amendment. I'm sure Matt's going to talk to you plenty about this and also about freedom. Yes, it is true that that is different, but notice that the context in which the Second Amendment was written was quite a specific one. It was about well-armed militias overthrowing a tyrannical government. I mean, it was mostly aimed at our tyrannical government that we infringed upon you and then you got rid of in the American Revolution, as you call it, or the First Civil War, as we like to know it back home. Let's face it, right? The likelihood of a tyrannical government is far less likely now because you don't have Brits, other than us two, arriving on your shores and trying to take over. You also just have far more sort of strong checks on democratic mandates, right? You have freedom of the press and all of those kinds of things. The likelihood of a tyrannical government is incredibly limited. Also, if the government did decide to become tyrannical, the world's largest military force, that is bigger than the next 28 combined, is not going to be resisted by a few people owning some guns. It's just not going to work, right? You would need surface-to-air missiles, you would need anti-tank defenses, you'd probably need nuclear warheads. I doubt anybody in this room thinks the average American should be able to go into Walmart and buy a nuclear warhead. That would be absurd. But also notice that the thing about the Constitution, and you know, this is coming from an outsider, and maybe I'm wrong on this one, but I had heard that Thomas Jefferson thought that it should be changed and rethought about roughly every 19 years to protect people from being beholden to the ideas of their fathers and grandfathers. I'm suggesting might be time for a change on this particular thing, because people die as a result of the lack of gun control, because it doesn't matter if you are a good person with a gun or whether you have perfect mental health. The fact is that if you have easy access to a handgun, or your child has easy access to a handgun, those tiny little fallibilities that exist within humans, those tiny moments where we do something stupid, the moment where Matt gets drunk and throws a punch at somebody much bigger than him outside a bar, that becomes so much more dangerous, right? Those moments of stress, those moments of fear, those moments of depression turn into irreversible and deadly decisions that you've made in an instant with a fallible human brain. Of course, this is not going to be perfect. Of course, this will not remove all guns from America. But what it will do when we reconsider what the Second Amendment might have been, and when we reconsider how willing we are to allow children to be massacred in their elementary schools and people to be massacred in their church, what it will do is reduce at least some of those deaths. It will leave many, many Americans far safer, because I'm going to end with the fact that we need to remember that you are much more at risk from being shot to death when you bring a gun into your home than when you live without one.
Before I begin my speech, I too would like to reiterate the thanks to everyone who has brought us here today, to all of you for showing up. Even if you are just here because your teachers told you to come, it's nice to have a captive audience anyway. Look, I'm not going to stand here and lie to you. I think there are some things that I am willing to debate, there are other things I'm not willing to debate. I'm not willing to say that the UK is more dangerous. I know that you hear this on Fox News or you hear this on Glenn Beck's radio show. It's just not true. The UK is safer for its lack of guns. Australia is safer for its lack of guns. That is just a fact. I'm not willing to challenge that. I also am willing to say that there are probably too many guns in this country. It makes me a bit nervous. I don't think that many people should have that access to that many weapons. I think you would be safer without them. But that's not the debate we're having. It's not an aspirational debate. It's not a debate about which utopian society we would like to create if we could. It's a debate about where we live today. It's a debate about the America that exists in the 21st century and how we make this country safer. I'm going to say that stringent gun controls, this short, sharp shock, is the worst possible way to try and make America safer. It takes guns off the wrong people and leaves people at risk. It damages the inalienable rights that you all hold to defend yourselves, and it also promotes a possibly deadly backlash. Because, look, we need to be incredibly pragmatic when we talk about something as emotional as guns, when we talk about something as central to the American story as the right to bear arms. So let's look at a couple of points. First of all, there are still going to be loads and loads and loads and loads of guns in the US. It doesn't matter if you ban them tomorrow. Why? Because buybacks and amnesties, though they might have worked in the UK and Australia, as I alluded to in my POI, don't work in the US in the same way. Why? 3 reasons. First of all, people just won't give them up. Why won't they give them up? Because they believe that they have an absolute constitutional right to keep those guns. They believe is the definition of a tyrannical government is a government which wishes to take their guns away. They have a massive incentive to break that deal, to just not hand those weapons in. Notice in a country where you don't register firearms, it's incredibly difficult to know who's handing those weapons in and who's not. The guns just aren't going to turn up in police stations. People are just going to keep holding on to them. And what's more, they might be holding them on to good reasons, because secondly, at the moment, illegal guns exist right now. People already have guns without serial numbers that they bring in from abroad. They already manufacture guns which are illegal currently. Thirdly, 3D printing. People have already begun to create 3D printed guns out of fear that one day the government will start to register those firearms and they want to be able to create weapons without having to talk to the federal government. They've already done that, and people are already making those weapons, and they have no incentive to use that 3D printing. They have a huge incentive to use that 3D printing at the point at which you start trying to take their guns away. This is important for 2 reasons. First reason, individual rights. Because one of the founding principles of America, one of the most important aspects of your founding myth, the story that created this country, is that there are certain founding principles, certain individual rights which are inalienable, that it doesn't matter how socially useful it might be to do something, you cannot infringe on that personal sphere of a particular individual. That makes sense, right? You were a country born out of infringements upon individual liberties, from the American Revolution, or First Civil War, that Chessie wanted to talk about, all the way back to the Puritans who left the UK in 1620 on the Mayflowers. That idea that there should always be that individual space for a human being which is absolute and is inalienable, that is their castle, that the state cannot infringe upon. And that these individuals cannot be subjected to social engineering. It doesn't matter if you think society might get a bit safer without guns. Being able to tell someone that they are not going to be able to defend themselves, that they are not going to be able to react when they hear that noise in the night, is telling someone that their individual rights do not matter as much as the social engineering a bureaucrat wants to see in Washington. No, thank you. Because up until the point which your liberty intersects with someone else, it is yours and it's only yours. It is yours absolutely. That is why we can defend the First Amendment, but also tell people that they're not allowed to discriminate on the grounds of homosexuality, because that's the moment which it intersects with someone else's. Owning a gun doesn't intersect with anyone else's right to life. It intersects with their right to life when you use it illegally, and that's why that bit is illegal. We don't ban religion because some religions have homophobic pastors. We ban the homophobia. We ban the discrimination there, at the point at which it actually affects someone else. Under this logic, we just ban religion because we say, well, if you're more religious, you're more likely to discriminate against people on the grounds of sexuality, so therefore we should just ban that as well. No, that's not how individual rights work. That's not how the First Amendment works. It's not how the Second Amendment works. Because when you take away an individual's right to defend themselves, when you say that they are not able to respond when someone threatens them, they have no way to defend themselves. And I don't think it's fair to disarm an individual in Florida because someone does something wrong in Oregon, or fair to disarm someone in Washington because someone has done something wrong in Connecticut. It wasn't their decision. They didn't give up those rights when someone else broke those rights. That's not how laws work. Someone else might well speed. That doesn't mean that I have a right to, or just should always be locked up and not have access to my car. Yeah, go.
What about my individual right to drink alcohol age 15 if that's not harming anybody else? Why does the government stop me doing that?
It does harm you. It just quite clearly does. Also, at 15, we don't let people make those choices for the same reason we don't let 15-year-olds buy guns or drive cars or vote, because we understand that you only get access to certain rights at the age of 18. Okay, so it's incredibly important because it protects your right to life. It protects your right to property. The right to defend yourself is an incredibly important one for these reasons, because it's the ability for you to defend all the other rights that we hold so incredibly dear. And even if you don't buy this argument, even if you think I'm talking absolute rubbish and claptrap and I have no idea what I'm talking about, important fact here, lots of other people agree with me. And we all know that. We all know which people I'm talking about. The 1,274 militias that the FBI are currently watching. The fact that you are much more likely to be killed by a white terrorist with a gun than a Muslim terrorist in the United States. The biggest threat to your liberty by far is white Second Amendment militia groups. They recently set fire to the car of an Arkansas police chief who talked about gun control, right? But it's not just them either. It's people who are in the mainstream. What does Glenn Beck say tomorrow? What does Bill O'Reilly say tomorrow? What does Sean Hannity say the day Obama goes on television and says, I'm taking all of your guns away now? Notice that after Sandy Hook, after children were killed, it was still impossible for people to talk about any form of gun regulation. You didn't pass bans on high-capacity magazines. You didn't pass bans on open carry. In fact, you got more liberal with guns. You allowed more open carry. You allowed more bullets, more magazines, more unregistered firearms. If someone stands up tomorrow and says, I'm just going to take your guns away now, we know exactly what's going to happen. Because we've met these people on our travels. We've met these people who are incredibly lovely. Children, young kids who want to be police officers and are in the army reserves now and own firearms, and said to us in no uncertain terms that they would shoot a police officer who came to take their guns. These are the people who went down to Clive Bundy's ranch, right, and pointed weapons at federal officers for trying to claim the grazing rights that they were owed. We know exactly what happens the day you try and take firearms away, and it doesn't make the Americas any safer. It means you are unable to defend yourselves, and it's going to prompt a backlash which is going to be horribly violent. It's going to be ineffective, and it's going to be unsafe. For those two reasons, I'm incredibly proud to oppose.
Matt tells us that a short, sharp shock can never be a good thing, can never help this situation, and also that we shouldn't infringe upon individual, inalienable rights in order to protect the nebulous concept of wider society. In this speech, I'm going to respond to those two things. So first, short, sharp shock, right? So Matt tells you no one's going to want to give their guns back. I mean, that's not true, right? Lots and lots of people are just quite law-abiding citizens who like to do things that are not illegal and comply with new laws as they come in. Notice that this already is a massive benefit on my side because, I mean, we all just do know like people who like to obey the law, right? Those law-abiding citizens are just going to have fewer guns in their home. And what exactly does those fewer guns in their home look like, right? It's just fewer accidents. It's fewer moments where you foolishly forgot to put a lock back on that gun safe and now your toddler is wandering around the neighbor's garden with a loaded weapon. It's fewer moments where, in a moment of anger or fear, you reach out, you grab your weapon to defend yourself from something that may or may not be a threat, you pull a trigger, and you take another person's life. That is in itself a good thing. Like there will be an increase a decrease in the number of people who own guns when you bring in this short, sharp shock. Lots of people will obey the law. Notice that even when you can point to something having been in the Constitution, we amend the Constitution, you guys amend the Constitution quite a lot, right? There are various clauses that used to relate to the idea of owning slaves. We managed to stop that happening despite enormous opposition, despite the fact that lots of people were very keen on continuing to believe that some human beings weren't worth the same as others. It wasn't necessarily popular with everybody, but we still managed to do it. And notice that the tide on this stuff is turning, because Matt tells you that it was impossible to talk about gun control after Sandy Hook. But we now have lots of candidates who are very willing to stand on a stage, to stand on a national television screen and tell you that they will not stand for any more massacres. President Obama will happily stand there and tell you that he doesn't want to have this conversation again in his presidency, but he worries that we will because there isn't enough gun control in this country. It's, we want to take advantage of that tide that is starting to turn. But let's, not right now. Let's chat about the militias, because Matt's, very worried about this group of people. Sometimes we just have to deal with quite unpleasant people as a government. Notice that we do have things like law enforcement, and notice that I tell you that the United States Army is like super powerful. Ditto the police force. Sorry. Sometimes we have to deal with unpleasant people in order to make our society as a whole safer. Sometimes we are going to have to deal with militias in order to make society as a whole safer. Matt conveniently tells you that the FBI's got them all on a night's watch list. So that should make finding their unregistered guns slightly easier. So even if I don't get rid of all of the guns, right, what I am doing is bringing you lots and lots of households that no longer have guns, lots and lots of households that are much safer. Looking now at inalienable individual rights to protect yourselves. We do compromise on these all the time. There are age limits on who can or cannot buy a gun. That's not because we think children are not American citizens and don't have rights. It's just that we recognize that sometimes we have to limit those rights, because if you let a 5-year-old buy a gun, they're likely to do some damage to some other people. I tell you, you let most people have a handgun, and there are various situations in which they're likely to do damage to other people. We're sort of happy to compromise on those inalienable rights when we point to a benefit for wider society, but also individuals, because this idea of an individual's right to protect themselves is not necessarily separate from the idea of society being a safer place, because when I tell you that lots of homes in America will no longer have gun violence happening in them, I don't mean other people's homes, or, I'm also talking about other people's homes, but there's also your homes. It is you guys not dying, and you as individuals not dying, that make up the broader understanding of society being a safer place. Matt, do you want to go now? No? Okay, cool. Thought he had a question. Maybe he's forgotten it. So this sort of like individual right to self-protection is to some extent fulfilled when society gets safer. Go on then.
Are any candidates currently proposing a scheme anywhere near as radical as the one you're talking about?
No, but I think they should be. And to be honest, I think that there's a massive overestimation of the kind of backlash. It's about an effective communication to the American people of how much safer they and their children would be. Because funnily enough, I, unlike maybe Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump, believe that the American people care about their children. Maybe that's a controversial opinion. I don't know. You guys can tell me. But this other thing, right, about this idea about it being a self-protection. Most people are just really, really bad at defending themselves. We would all love to be James Bond. We would all love to be the hero who, if somebody comes in the back of this room and tries to shoot me and all of you, everyone here wants to be the person who takes that shooter out. Unfortunately, none of you will do. Most of you, and they've done tests on this with paintball guns, most of you will run over each other to get to the door. Those of you who do decide to shoot are more likely to shoot me or each other than you are to take out the shooter, because human beings panic, particularly untrained human beings. But notice that even the best trained soldiers in the world, even the elite of the American army, shot British soldiers in friendly fire because stressful situations can make for bad decision-making. So most of you are probably not the elite of the American army. Anybody who is here, hello, thank you, please don't shoot me. But most of you are not that. You are just ordinary human beings. You are fallible. You are unlikely to, in the middle of the night, when you think that there is a threat to your home, correctly assess that threat and manage to take out that person, right? Because notice that when I wake up in the middle of the night and hear a strange noise, there's a good chance that it's my neighbour's cat or my neighbour's child. In the UK, I can't reach for a gun to protect myself in my sleep-addled state because I think somebody is coming to infringe upon my home and my family. In the US, I could. And the consequences of the ability to do that, to reach over, pull a gun from the drawer, and pull the trigger before I'm even fully awake, are absolutely devastating in any case that I am wrong about what is going on. And that is just something that we can't continue to stand for in the United States. We need to protect ourselves, but the only way that we can do that is by taking guns out of people's hands, taking them out of their homes, taking them out of their churches, their schools, and their colleges.
As I said at the beginning of my last speech, this is not a debate about truth or statistics or what even necessarily is the perfect society for us to live in. It's about what actually happens when we enact this policy. Not some magical dreamland where the guns disappear and everyone becomes safe, but actually what happens in this particular country, in the United States, where we have such a particular relationship with weapons. Because, look, Jessie might be right, yeah, that you're not safer with a gun in the home. Yeah, she's probably right on that. She's also right that most people aren't particularly effective at defending themselves. True. The problem is that most people in America don't believe that. Most people in America do believe that they will be able to defend their families, that they are safer with a gun in the home. For understandable reasons, right? People trust themselves. They believe that they're going to be the good guy. They're going to be the one who's going to be able to stop that intruder. What that means is that this policy isn't effective because it just doesn't work. Because Jessie can stand there and go to an NRA convention and say, look, guys, you're just not safer with a gun in the home. The NRA doesn't go, oop, you got us, fair play, great answer. We're going to get rid of all our guns now because we don't see them as particularly important. No, they stand there, they wave their guns in the air, and they say, from our cold, dead hands, as they did after Columbine, when they decided that a national conference to be held at Boulder, Colorado was the appropriate place to go 2 weeks after one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. They purposefully choose where they hold their national conventions following school shootings because they want to prove to people that there is nothing that would ever stop them carrying a gun. That is why they follow school shootings around. That's why they hold rallies in towns which have just suffered horrible losses, because they want to reaffirm their belief in guns as totally and utterly absolute. You cannot discount them in this debate, because even though it is horrible that we have to think about people who we don't necessarily agree with, they exist, and we have to take their actions into account. This affects this debate, obviously, three sets of people quite differently. I'm going to talk about three scales of gun ownership. I'm going to talk about the law-abiding gun owners that Jessie wants to tell you about. I'm going to talk about the kind of the grey area, the 50 shades of grey in between either end of this debate. And on the final end, I'm going to talk about those groups, those 1,274, who are groups who are currently being monitored by the FBI and what they do. So first of all, let's talk about these total law-abiders, these people who will just hand their guns in. Because they exist, right? There are those, those mom and pop gun owners who will just hand in the handgun that they keep for protection. But importantly, they are now no longer able to choose to try and defend themselves. Yeah, of course, statistically, it might be dodgy for them to make that choice. But what I say is I think they have a right to make that choice. Because America's really dangerous. It's not like the UK. In terms of gun deaths, in terms of gun ownership, there are only two other places which have more guns per head than you do. It's Somalia and Afghanistan. And, man, I mean, if I'm going to Somalia or Afghanistan, I'm not going in unarmed, or at least not with people who aren't armed and can use those guns efficiently. America just is quite a dangerous place. And I think, as I proved in my first speech, lots of people will keep those guns. Obviously, as an individual who is not armed in the United States, you're making a choice that says, well, one day, perhaps, especially if you live in an urban area, someone might come through that door, someone might come through your window, and you're now not going to be able to defend yourself. Because a government decided that, in general, society is safer with less guns. True. The problem is that doesn't take any account of your individual rights, of your right as an individual. No, thank you, Jessie. What a face. It makes no account of your individual right to defend yourself. I don't know why the individual should have to sacrifice themselves at the altar of social utility because a bureaucrat in Washington thinks it is useful. It is dangerous, it is unfair upon those individuals. Secondly, let's talk about the unimpressed, the people who are quite confident gun owners, probably might be members of the NRA, definitely aren't members of any sort of violent militia. Notice this is quite a mainstream position, right? The NRA is a huge lobbying force, has vast numbers of members. People who watch Fox News, the most watched news channel in the United States, as worrying as that might be to some of you or not. They're still very, very mainstream. And Jessie says, oh, no, they'll follow the law. They'll definitely follow the law. No, they won't. For quite a simple reason. Because The law of a tyrannical government is no law at all, and that is something ingrained very deeply within the political theory of this country. That's why you have a constitution. That's why the Second Amendment is there in the first place, is to stop a tyrannical government. At the point at which a government starts saying, I'm going to take all of your guns away, these people aren't going to go, yeah, legit, seems fair, yeah, take them. No, they're going to say, look, the Constitution is more important than any federal policy that exists in the short term. This is something which exists as the absolute basis and foundation of the very meaning of what it means to be American. And the very moment at which you try and take my guns away, you become a tyrannical state. Tyrannical states don't have any legitimacy because they will act outside of the Constitution. I mean, that's a legitimate interpretation of American constitutional law. In fact, it's probably quite a mainstream interpretation of American constitutional law. A lot of people just won't give up those guns. Or a lot of people will start buying illegal guns. What happens when you buy illegal guns? What happens when you push things into a black market? I mean, it's an obvious example. It's an easy example to tell you to look at what happens with prohibition in the 1920s. It's an easy example to tell you what has happened with the war on drugs. It doesn't make criminals go away. It doesn't make crime disappear. It makes crime get worse. It puts money in the hands of criminals. You now have criminal gangs who have access to firearms and people who have an incentive to try and buy them illegally because they think it's the only way they'll be able to defend their family and they think it's the only way they'll be able to defend their constitutional rights. That is more power for people that I don't particularly like, that I don't want to see with more money and with more weapons. Thirdly then, before I do.
If you're a burglar in a high-crime city and you no longer believe that the homeowner will carry a gun, what's the likelihood of you taking a gun in and what's the likelihood of you deciding to shoot them when all you really want is their television?
Yeah, great, this is fine, but this is unfortunately one of those prisoner's dilemmas, right? Because as soon as a gun owner or homeowner decides not to carry a gun, but the criminal does, the criminal just automatically wins. Criminals know that homeowners will think like that and know that a lot of homeowners will keep their guns. That is why a lot of criminals will also keep their guns. It's like nuclear disarmament. No one wants to go first. That's why guns will stay incredibly central to America. Thirdly, militia. Because Chelsea's just like, yeah, whatever, militia, fine, we'll deal with that later. I'm going to say there's a reason, a good reason, why the FBI didn't shoot the militia who went down to see Clive Bundy on his ranch. There's a good reason why the police didn't shoot Black Panthers when they decided to arm themselves as well. Because a government shooting its citizens isn't great. It's not a brilliant policy outcome if you're like, yeah, of course we'll enforce the law, but it will require the massacre of thousands of civilians. That's not an ideal policy outcome. That's not the sort of thing that one dreams of when one thinks up a new law. But also notice it tends to escalate violence, because once you do start shooting those militia groups, that second group, that 50 Shades of Grey that I talked to you about in the middle there, they then suddenly become a lot more interested, because this now does look like a tyrannical government. Because this is a government which is firstly taking your guns, and secondly shooting people who are trying to protect their constitutional rights. I do not want to see what the Glenn Beck show looks like the day that Second Amendment activists start getting shot by federal policemen. That is not a good day. That is not a day which is going to be calm. That is a day which is going to look like it did after the Oklahoma bombing, which is obviously the most famous example of such white terrorism. It is only going to get worse. It is only going to get more violent. I'm very proud to oppose.
At this time, we'll allow 10 minutes for audience questions. Please come to the front of the stage, and I'll give you the microphone.
Hello, my name is Brianna Creek. I attend here at Chesapeake College. I have a question for my man in the red right here. I don't know your name, I'm sorry. Mr. Matthew. I just had a question. You brought up a very interesting point about freedom earlier, and morally, I just wanted to ask you why you think that the freedom to own a gun is more important than people's lives. Because at the end of the day, there is no such thing as freedom to a dead man. If you know that lack of gun control is increasing the deaths of innocent people, I don't know why morally you think that that is okay. So I just wanted to ask you that.
So I think this isn't about a clash between the right to bear arms and the right to life, because those people who defend their lives using weapons are defending their own right to life. This is a clash of right to life versus right to life. What the right to bear arms does is it allows people to try and defend their lives when they need to. It's not a clash between gun rights and safety. It's safety on both sides.
Yes, my name is William Gerland. I'm a United States Marine, so I know a little bit about gun safety and all that. I have a question for you, ma'am. You said that Americans would just give up their guns. As a member or a person of Britain, don't you already know that Americans don't really take well to a tyrannical government?
So I'm going to just hazard a guess that the government that you had when we ruled you was significantly more tyrannical than anybody in America believes that they live under right now. And I think that ultimately Americans increasingly believe in the role of a government is to be one that allows citizens to live fulfilling lives, to allow them to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And the reality is that a lack of gun control laws means that people are not able to pursue life, liberty, and happiness because they're getting shot in their elementary schools.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Trenton Kersey, and I'm a student here at Chesapeake College. And personally, I'm going to college for criminal justice law enforcement. And I have a question for you, Chessie. Someday I do hope to be a police officer, and I can tell you right now, if it ever came down to it, to where I was called to duty to go take people's guns, I would quit my job because I know I'm going to die as soon as I go to the first farmer's house or, anybody that cares about their weapons. And, in Texas, they have pretty much like no gun laws. You can carry at 18 without a concealed carry permit, and their crime rates are little to nothing. And what makes you think that if a homeowner doesn't have a gun, what makes you think that the robber coming into the house is going to say, well, he doesn't have a gun, I don't need to take one?
Because we know in the UK that homeowners don't have guns, and the overwhelming majority, I think it's something like 99.2% of the robberies that we have are burglars don't carry weapons, and people don't die, either the burglar or the homeowner. It just doesn't happen because that calculation happens differently. Obviously, this would be a big change for the United States of America, but I'm just saying that I think that there are enough people who are moving towards a world in which they don't want guns to be as prevalent as they are, in which they don't want any people to be able to have access to them and people to be able to threaten their lives, and are realizing that for most people, owning a gun is not a good backup safety option because you won't be able to execute the kind of self-defense that people would like to be able to when they choose to buy a gun to protect their home and protect their families.
Hello, my name is Grace Taylor. I have a question for both of you, actually. Do you think that your base culture as British citizens has biased and affected your arguments towards this issue in any way? I mean, obviously your cultures are different and you don't maybe not understand, but you don't come from the same places as Americans do, and not just Americans. America's a large place. People in Texas feel different than people here.
Oh yeah, I mean, Britain has made me hate freedom, or at least hate the idea of individual liberties and freedom in the way that Americans understand it is just something that is very, very alien to us in Britain. It's not part of our sort of individual or collective psyche. It's definitely influenced my arguments and indeed my general beliefs on this issue and many others.
Absolutely, I'm obviously a socially created being just like everyone else in this room. Anyone who claims to give you unbiased information is lying, because everyone comes from a certain social background. If Fox News tells you they're telling the truth, nope, not true. If the BBC are telling you they're telling the truth, nope, not true. Because everyone chooses certain facts dependent on what they think is important. They all see the world in a very particular way. So yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the most interesting debates for us to have as British debaters coming to the US, and having done this debate all over the United States, is to see the difference in reaction that people have to different sorts of debates. We did this debate in West Virginia, and that was really interesting.
Hi, I'm Alex Adams, and I was wondering, if everyone would have their guns taken away, it says in the Federalist Papers when they founded the country that we had the right to bear arms to, like you said, prevent a tyrannical government. And with the state of the world today, I find it somewhat tyrannical in its current state, the way the war on drugs is pivoting the police majorly against the poor people of this country. And if you were to completely rid everyone of guns, I don't see how it would benefit like the whole the American culture with it would just put the squeeze on particularly poor people, and I want to see I wanted your to know how you thought it would affect people respectively compared to the I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. It would how it would affect people respective to you know, with the current drug policies and with the militarization of police and such, having people have no art or way to defend themselves.
I'm just not sure that it is actually in the calculation of policymakers in the United States to think about whether or not the people will rise up in a well-organized militia to resist their tyrannical government when they decide on anything from your foreign policy to the war on drugs to you know, Medicaid and things like that, because they know that realistically the American people don't have a military way of resisting them if they chose to be a tyrannical state. The thing that keeps the American state in check is active democratic participation. It is people pushing for voter registration drives, particularly in poor and deprived areas. It is a press that actively critiques all policymakers. Those are the things that now protect Americans from a tyrannical government and ensure that you remain a democratic state. And those are the things that people need to be able to access in order to do that, not guns, because, as I said in my speech, unless you're happy to give everybody surface-to-air missiles and nukes, there isn't a military resistance to the American government becoming tyrannical. It has to be a democratic one.
My name is Charles Beshy. I'm a student here at Chesapeake. I have a question for Jesse, I believe your name is. I am a supporter of gun rights, and one of my points to being a supporter of said rights is that if people tend to rely on law enforcement officers, such as police officers, they'll have to wait for them to get there, and that isn't as immediate as people having the right to defend themselves. So it would be a problem if people had to wait for police officers. What do you have to say about that?
I'd like to see a set of police force that can get there more quickly, I guess. A dirty liberal, but I'd be happy for the government to just spend more money on ensuring that there is a protective police force, because those people are trained to use force to protect the citizens in the way that citizens aren't trained to protect themselves.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Good afternoon. My name is Olson Dorsey, and my question is directed to you, Jesse. Earlier you alluded to a requirement for owning guns. So my question is, what would you propose as a minimum basic requirement for actually owning a gun?
So sort of like very similar to the model that we have in the United Kingdom, you would have to have a purpose for owning that gun, and that purpose would largely be limited to if you're a farmer and you need to shoot pests on your land, or if you are hunting and you have somewhere that you can go hunt and prove that you have access to that land and permission of the landowner. I see no problem with people going and engaging in hunting for sport, as long as that is with weapons that are limited and that you have a license and an obvious purpose for that. This debate is about making sure that people don't just have guns in their homes, but rather have a purpose for them, I guess.
All right, we'll now begin 5-minute closing statements.
Matt may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. No, seriously, I'm actually not the only one. Like, an increasing number of Americans are deciding that they do stand for much more stringent gun controls. 50 to 91% of Americans are looking for greater gun control than currently exists, according to a helpful stat that somebody told me in, I think, Philadelphia. It's been a long tour. So the important thing is that when I talk to you about the kinds of people who are just going to be law-abiding citizens, who are going to accept that Jefferson wrote a constitution that was intended to be reconsidered and changed depending on the current context, when they look at that and they say, well, realistically, well-armed militia resisting a tyrannical government, not going to be effective right now, and we probably don't need one because we have good democratic checks. When we look at all of those people, it means that even if the NRA starts mass printing guns with 3D printers and trying to distribute them, there will still be lots of people, lots of households, lots of parents who choose not to buy those guns because they don't want to do something that is illegal. They don't want to do something that could bring law enforcement into their homes and have them locked up because they want to be there. They want to be an active part of their community and an active part of their family. So what do those people, those dreamers like me, what does their life look like now? Firstly, they're just less likely to be killed with a firearm, because in America, if you don't own a handgun, you don't own a firearm on your house, you are less likely to be killed by a firearm than if you do. If they live in small towns with low crime, right, they're just in far less danger, because often the only danger that there really was themselves, was their child accidentally picking up that gun or them using it and shooting themselves in the foot or something. I don't know. People can be really stupid, particularly when they're scared and it's the middle of the night and they think their house is being broken into and it's actually just a cat. But even, right, if they live in urban areas, even if they live in areas of high crime, notice those areas exist in the United Kingdom, and we don't have people just being shot by criminals. Why is that? Firstly, because criminals are less likely to carry a gun when they believe that the vast majority of law-abiding Americans are going to be abiding by this law. And secondly, because even if you are a criminal carrying a gun and you're breaking into somebody's home, very few people are doing that because they want to be a murderer. Usually they're doing it out of economic necessity, and they're doing it because they want to steal a laptop or a television. And we say that the loss of your laptop and your television is far better than the loss of yours or your child's life, because you make the wrong call and you don't manage to defend your home, and instead you do something much worse. So the dreamers are all better off. Now let's look at the militias. So notice that they are now actually just breaking the law by refusing to participate in the buyback, and by refusing to hand over their guns, and by refusing to engage in a new system of law that the United States has decided to set up under my world. They are breaking the law. That is it's a good and strong reason, right, for law enforcement to attempt to seize those guns and arrest them. Notice Matt tells you they're on an FBI watch list, so we know where most of these people are. If you shoot and kill a police officer who is doing their duty, who is doing something that the government has asked them to do as an officer of the law and an officer of that government, you lose public sympathy. Because the American public don't like to see their law enforcement officers. They don't like to see honest, hardworking fathers or brothers or husbands or wives or sisters being shot in the line of duty. So the militia might have some fans now, and they might have some very wealthy business people in the NRA now, but when you start shooting police officers, you lose those fans, you lose that sympathy, and importantly, you lose lots of the, as Matt calls them, the unimpressed, because very few of these unimpressed, I think, genuinely believe that they are resisting a tyrannical government, because they would not be able to resist that tyrannical government with the handgun that they keep in their bedside drawer. It just wouldn't work, right? There is no conceivable world in which they do. But also those unimpressed, right? They're just looking for results. Most people who are in the middle on an issue are just looking to be persuaded one way or the other. When we disaggregate the idea that owning a gun helps you protect your right to life, because statistically it doesn't, when we disaggregate that because we don't see mass death in those homes and those cities that abide by this law, when we change people's minds about this, turns out that people do change their minds. We all take in information from the world around us and we consider it and we rethink, right? Because when there wasn't mass death in the United Kingdom when we bought back guns, when there wasn't mass death in Australia when they bought back guns, even though many of them weren't registered, people realized in those countries that gun control worked. So when we do see fewer school shootings, when we do see fewer toddlers shooting their own parents because there is a gun in the household, when we don't see an increase in violent and armed crime, and when we make Glenn Beck look really stupid on television, I think the American people are going to join me in saying that they also have a dream, a different dream this time, but it's one still of a safer, happier world, and one in which everybody has the right and the ability to pursue life, liberty, and happiness.
A little yawn. I know it's been going a while, but we'll close it quickly, I promise. There is one question in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a hypothetical one. It's not a utopia or a dream. It's not about blind optimism or bad analogies with countries which are not America, with countries which didn't have more guns than people, and which did have, despite what Jesse thinks, registered gun ownership up until their buyback programs. The question in this debate is simple. What makes law-abiding citizens safer and protects their freedom to maintain that safety? There's only one side which does that. This side. 2 points in this debate. I know, right? Thanks. First point. There just simply will not be a significant drop in the number of gun deaths. There will not be a significant drop in the number of guns owned. Why? First of all, lots of people do not believe that the government has a right to take those guns. They will not hand them in. There's no way for us to know who has those guns. Most of them are unregistered. But also, even those who want to follow the law have an incentive not to hand those guns in. Why? Because they are now stuck in basically a Mexican standoff, right? Someone has to put their guns down first. Law-abiding homeowners, even the ones who don't necessarily believe that it is the mark of a tyrannical government which wants to take their guns away, they notice lots and lots of us know that the government taking away guns will be seen as tyrannical. But even those who don't believe it is will know that everyone else is going to keep their guns. That everyone else is going to, the criminals are still going to have their guns, even the supposed good guys are still going to have their guns, and that they're going to be the only ones without them. That is a huge incentive for even law-abiding citizens to make a very genuine decision and go, you know what, I feel safer with a gun in the home, and knowing that the federal government doesn't know I have this gun, I'm just going to hide it and just hope they never find out, because I don't want to give up this gun, because I don't want to give up the opportunity to not protect my family. It's like nuclear disarmament, right? No one wants to be the first one to become defenseless. This is important in the US and not in the UK and Australia, because in the UK and Australia, we didn't have that many guns. Our criminals never really had that many guns. We always had limits on the sort of guns that you could buy anyway. It's not true in the US. Every single homeowner will know, every single gun owner will know that everyone else has lots and lots of guns. They have no incentive to give them up. Also notice, they have a very good reason to keep those guns. The US is just incredibly dangerous. In the OECD, there's only one place where you're more likely to be killed by a gun, and that is Mexico. Other than that, you are the most dangerous place in the developed world. There's a perfectly good reason for these homeowners to carry a gun, and it is my contention that forcing people to give up that right to protect themselves in such dangerous circumstances is unethical, it is unfair, it is immoral. Indeed, anyone who dies as a result of this policy because they were no longer able to make that choice to defend their family, even if we don't necessarily support that choice or would make it ourselves, but they have that choice now to make that call. And if anyone dies because they were unable to protect themselves, that is a tragedy. Secondly, backlash. Look, we all accept, right, that nasty people exist, that people who do crazy things exist, and they will shoot the police. They will shoot at the police. They will raise their guns at the police. Notice they have done this already. They have set fire to police cars. They have blown up buildings in Oklahoma. They have pointed their guns at policemen in Nevada when they went down to protect Clive Bundy. But also notice that there is a much larger group of people who don't do that currently, who don't believe that they need to, because they don't believe that the government's really being tyrannical when it claims taxes or does anything like that, but who do believe that taking away all of the guns overnight is tyrannical. That is a very large proportion of people. That is probably every NRA member, at least, who believes that it is unconstitutional for governments to do this. Notice that they have a good interpretation of constitutional law when they say that a government taking away my right to defend myself absolutely overnight is unconstitutional, therefore makes the government tyrannical. That's how the Second Amendment reads. They will defend those guns, and it's perfectly reasonable for our friend at the front here who wants to be a police officer to not want to enforce that law, because he knows that he's going to be put at risk when doing so. And not just from the people who we know are nasty, not just the 1,274 militia groups who exist everywhere from Alaska to Arkansas to Alabama, from Minnesota, Michigan, and Maine, but everyone else as well. All those people who are not members of militia groups now but still believe in that right to defend themselves. They act in the same way, because Jesse might want to act tough and say, oh, we'll just force them to do it. But that's not a de-escalating moment, right? That's not good policy. We don't make policy on the basis of we'll just go in anyway and shoot them. It'll be fine. Because that's not how politics works. That's not how any government should think. Yeah, sure, sometimes people might end up shooting the police first, but sometimes the police might shoot first. This is going to happen all over the country. And it is just bad policy if it doesn't get rid of the guns that we claim it's going to and leads to police getting shot and leads to police shooting people. Because that just looks like war on the streets. That looks like a nightmare. In the end, ladies and gentlemen, Chessie is a dreamer. And she is the only one. Because whilst 90% of Americans supposedly want gun control of some form, no one is advocating for a policy as blind to the facts and blind to reality as this one. No one is advocating for the total removal of all guns in society. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama, they all defend the right of individuals to carry guns because they know what the facts are and they know how this country works. They know that it will not lead to more safety if you get rid of all the guns. Look, in this debate, a lot of you are going to be further to the right on this issue than I am. I doubt many of you are going to be further to the left on this issue than I am. I support lots of gun control. I think you should be moving towards more gun control. What I don't support and what I don't think is effective is a policy which is blind to the country in which it is being enacted, a policy which is blind to the people which is being enacted upon. If you're in the center, if you're on the left, or you're on the right, I'm still probably to the left of you on this debate, but Chessie is just much further left. You have to vote for side opposition.
Okay, now it's time to figure out who won the debate. I don't judge it, you guys do. So if you believe that Chessie arguing for increased gun laws won, stand up. That's it? All right, everybody? All right, sit down. All right, if you think Matthew won, opposing strict gun laws, stand up. All right, now I'm going to be honest, I didn't count, but I think Matthew won. Okay. On behalf of the Honors Council, Chesapeake College, and the Division of Arts and Sciences, please join me in thanking Chessie and Matthew. Okay, this concludes our event. Thank you for coming.